What's up guys, Thomas from FT Speed, and today we're installing lowering springs from Faction Fab on our BRZ. So the BRZ right now has coilovers. They have the Faction Fab F-spec coilovers, but we're going to be going back to the McPherson struts, the factory struts, so we can install our lowering springs. But the install is going to look the same regardless if you started with coilovers or if you already had the factory struts installed. So it's going to look a little bit different, but it's going to be the same if you're doing it to your car and your car's stock. So to start, to get this thing undone, to remove the coilover or the factory strut, we've got the sway bar end link that we need to remove. Then we've got 2 bolts here connecting the coilover or the strut to the knuckle. We've got a bolt holding on the brake line to the strut, and then we have up top 3 bolts holding on the top hat. So I like to start with the sway bar end link. I like to do that one first, and the easiest way to get this nut unspun, since it's going to be spinning in this little ball joint here, is to use an impact. So you can spin this off so you don't have to have a wrench and a little Allen here at the same time. That takes a long time, so this way is a lot easier and way faster. Booyah, already done. And then if you put this nut back on there, you won't lose it. So next we'll undo the brake line. Now for the bolts holding on the knuckle to the strut or the coilover, this is the factory bolt, the one on the top. As you can see, the one on the bottom looks a little bit different. That's because as a camber bolt, we just want to get a little bit more camber out of this setup, so that's why that looks different, but it comes out just the same. Alright, so once you got your strut out of the car, we're going to be using a impact to take the top one off. There's this little rubber cover you can take off. There's a 17 mil nut here, but using the impact, it'll usually spin this off so you don't have to crank at it each time with an Allen wrench in the center and a wrench on the nut. So this is the easier way, just like we did with the strut, the sway bar end link. Oh, before we do this, for safety reasons, we're going to be using a spring compressors, because this is technically under load. It's not under a ton of load. You could do it without it, but it is going to pop off, like, not violently, but it could hurt your finger. So we're going to put these on. Spring compressors are on. We're going to lock those down. Then we can go ahead and take this nut off. It is a 17 mil nut. There we go. See, there's still a little bit of spring compression there. Woo! Everything's falling. But now we can get this out. Now these come with shorter bump stops because we're lowering this car. It's a 1-inch drop in the front with the Faction Fab Lowering Springs, and then 0.8 of an inch in the rear, because the rear sits a little bit lower already from stock, so this kind of balances out, makes it look even. So we're going to be replacing these bump stops. Very easy. There we go. These dust covers are for the rear, and then we can go ahead and reassemble. We'll put this in. Make sure that you're lining up the end of the spring with the base part here where it goes on the spring perch, because if you don't, it's gonna get weird. Almost forgot the dust cover. Now I'm lightly threading it in with a socket just so we don't strip this, because next we're going to hit it with the impact. Boom. And this one is good to go. Alright, we're going to put the strut back in the car, doing the 3 bolts on the top hat, so we can kind of hang down here, and then we can get the bolts in the knuckle. This ABS wire, you want to make sure it goes underneath the knuckle, because otherwise you'll have to undo this, and it's kind of a pain to do extra work. So we're going to put the top bolt in first. This is kind of bigger, so there's a bigger hole on this side, so it goes from the rear forward. It's only going to fit one way. So we got that in. Then we got a camber bolt that's going to go on the bottom. You don't have to have camber bolts, but we're running them on our car. Then we can reinstall this brake line and then put these clips in for the ABS sensor. Since this nut is spinning, we're gonna have to use a wrench. We're using a pass-through ratchet here, and this is a 6mm Allen key we're using. So the fronts are finished. We're gonna get into the torque specs towards the end of the video. I'm gonna do both the front and the back at the same time. So let's go ahead and get started with the rear springs. Now, starting in the trunk behind this carpet, we've got on the driver's side this little clip. We disconnect that, move the carpet aside. There's gonna be a bunch of pop clips, but I've already undone them. We got 2 bolts, they're 14 mils that we're gonna undo to remove the top hat. All right, now that we're underneath the car, we're gonna be removing this bolt, and that bolt, and then hinging the lower control arm, and then taking out the coilover. There we go. Wow, that was a little sudden, but there we go. Got the old coilover off. Let's go ahead and get the McPherson strut back in. Now that we got the rear strut out, we're gonna do the same thing that we did in the front. Spring compressors first, then the bolt on the top, and then we're just gonna swap springs. These ones also come with shorter bump stops, and they also come with rear dust covers that fit on here. So let's go ahead and get that installed. This bolt here is going to be a 14mm. Alrighty. So the impact's not working, so I'm going to show you what it's like to get this out with an Allen and a wrench. So we've got these nifty pass-through ratcheting wrenches that allow you to put a Allen wrench through the top of it. So there is a 4mm Allen on the top and a 14mm socket on the top as well. So we're going to put this in here, and we're going to do this until it slowly comes off. A little stuck. Okay, we don't need that factory dust boot or that bump stop that just came out. So starting with the shock, let's get the new lowering spring in. Tight coils go towards the top. Make sure you match the end of the spring with the spring perch, just like that. New bump stop goes in here. You kind of squeeze it in here. There we go, squeeze it in just like that. Then we're gonna slide that in the middle. And all we got left is to put the top hat back on. That is good and tight. Make sure double inspection that the spring perch is correct, and this can go back in the car. All right, since the sway bar on the other side is connected, it's a little hard to get this last end link in, so we're gonna jack up the car a little bit, raise up the lower control arm, and that'll let us get the last bolt in. Now you may need a mallet for some motivation. Booyah. Now for torque specs, the top hat nuts up front, those need to be torqued down to 18 foot-pounds, while down below, the bolts that go on the knuckle, those need to be torqued down to 129 foot-pounds. The brake line bolt, that needs to be torqued down to 23.6 foot-pounds, and then over to the rear, the top mount bolts, the two 14mm bolts, those need to be torqued down to 22.4 foot-pounds. Now down below, the two bolts, the 17mm bolts that holds the shock on and the lower control arm to the lower subframe, those need to be torqued down to 89 foot-pounds. And lastly, we have the sway bar end link, and that bolt needs to be done to 33.2 foot-pounds. So that's how you install lowering springs on your FRS BRZ or 8.6. There's a couple extra steps when compared to installing coilovers. These ones are a little bit more difficult, so you do have to disassemble the strut, but you're saving a bunch of money by going with lowering springs versus coilovers. Now these coilovers, in particular the Faction Fab Lowering Springs, they lower the front by 1 inch and the rears by 0.8 of an inch. The spring rates up front are 230 inch-pounds, where the rear they're 250. If you want to pick up a set of these Faction Fab Lowering Springs, the link's going to be down in the description. If you guys have any questions at all, feel free to send us an email at sales@ftspeed.com. This is Thomas, and I'll see you guys in the next video. We do have new bump stops. See how these ones are. Everything's falling.